The mining ship Liberty drifted through the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. When Captain Jake Murphy first detected the alien distress signal on his scanner, and his crew of 12 humans had been collecting rare minerals for 6 months, without any excitement until that moment changed everything forever. Jake was 30 years old with brown hair and green eyes that had seen too much emptiness in space, but still held hope for something more than just rocks and darkness as he listened to the strange musical pattern of the distress call that seemed to pull at something deep in his chest. His first officer was a woman named Lisa from Texas, who had nerves of steel, and she looked at the readings with a frown because the signal was coming from a ship design that no human had ever seen before, with energy signatures that made their instruments go crazy. The crew gathered on the bridge as Jake made the decision to investigate, because even though first contact protocols said to report and wait for military backup, he could hear something in that signal that sounded like desperation and pain, that transcended species. As they approached the source, they saw a ship that looked like it was made of living crystal with surfaces that shifted between purple and silver depending on the angle of light, and it was badly damaged with what looked like weapon burns across its hull. Jake suited up in his environmental gear and took Lisa and 2 other crew members with him as they docked with the alien vessel using their universal airlock adapter that had been gathering dust since it was installed 3 years ago. Inside the ship, the walls glowed with a soft bioluminescent light, and the air was thick with a sweet scent, like flowers mixed with ozone as they followed the main corridor toward what their scanners said was the bridge where one life sign remained. The bridge door opened with a sound like singing, and there she was lying on the floor in a pool of silvery blood that seemed to shimmer with its own light, and Jake forgot all his training as he rushed to help her without thinking about the danger. She had purple skin that seemed to have tiny stars beneath the surface and silver hair that moved like it was underwater even in the artificial gravity. And when her 4 eyes opened and focused on him, Jake felt like he was falling into an ocean of light. Her hand reached up with 6 delicate fingers and touched his helmet, and suddenly his mind was filled with images and emotions that were not his own, showing him a planet of crystal cities and beings of light, being destroyed by dark ships with weapons that turned matter into nothing. Jake understood without words that she was Princess Lyra of the Celestial Empire, and her ship had been attacked by pirates who wanted to capture her for ransom. But she had fought them off at great cost, and now she was dying far from home. He carefully lifted her in his arms, and she weighed almost nothing, as if her bones were made of something lighter than human materials, and he carried her back to their ship, where their medical bay waited with technology that might save her. Lisa protested that bringing an alien on board violated every regulation, but Jake looked at her with determination and said that leaving someone to die violated something more important than regulations, which was basic humanity itself. The next 3 days were critical, as Jake stayed by her bedside using their medical computer to analyze her biology, which was silicon-based rather than carbon, but somehow compatible enough with their equipment to keep her stable. When she finally woke up properly, her eyes found his immediately, and she tried to speak, but her throat was damaged, so instead she touched his hand skin to skin, since he had removed his gloves to work on the medical equipment. The touch was electric, and Jake could suddenly understand her thoughts, which came not in words but in pure meaning, as she explained that her people were empathic telepaths who communicated through physical contact and emotional resonance. She showed him that she was traveling to Earth to establish diplomatic relations when the pirates attacked, because her father, the Emperor, had heard that humans were the only species brave enough to stand against the Void Hunters, who threatened all peaceful civilizations. Jake spent hours with her as she recovered and taught her English, while she taught him to open his mind to her form of communication, and he learned that despite being alien, she laughed at his bad jokes and cried when he told her about losing his parents. One evening, as the ship continued toward Earth, she asked him why he had saved her when his own people would probably fear her. And Jake thought for a moment before saying, "Hey, sweetie, you needed help, and that was enough for me." Princess Lyra blushed, with her purple skin turning a deeper shade of violet that Jake was learning meant emotional intensity, and she replied, "Yes, darling," in her musical voice that had finally healed enough to speak human words. She explained that among her people, those words were not casual, but carried deep meaning because sweetie implied an emotional connection. and darling was reserved for someone you trusted with your life essence, which was their concept of a soul. Jake felt something shift between them like invisible threads connecting their hearts, and he realized that this alien princess had become more important to him in a few days than anyone had been in years of lonely space travel. The rest of the crew slowly warmed up to Lyra as she helped repair their ship with her advanced knowledge and showed them technologies that were centuries ahead of human development, but she always returned to Jake's side. They were still a month from Earth when Lyra received a transmission from her homeworld in a language that sounded like crystal chimes, and her face became serious as she translated that the Void Hunters had found her father's fleet. She had to make a choice between continuing to Earth to complete her diplomatic mission or returning home to help her people fight an enemy that had destroyed dozens of civilizations across the galaxy. Jake watched her struggle with the decision and knew that whatever she chose, he would support her because somewhere between the distress signal and this moment, she had become his definition of home. The decision weighed on Lyra like a physical force as she stood in the observation deck watching the stars streak by, and Jake stood beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth through the recycled air of the ship, turned to him with all four eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and explained that if she returned home without Earth Alliance, her people would fight alone and probably lose. But if she continued to Earth, her father might die before she saw him. Again, Jake did something that surprised them both by taking her six-fingered hand in his and saying that Earth would not let her people fight alone because humans had a saying that actions speak louder than words, and saving her people would prove humanity worth. Lisa and the crew volunteered to change course immediately when Jake explained the situation, because they all had seen enough of Lyra to know that her people were worth saving. And besides, they were miners who knew how to fight dirty when needed. The ship Liberty was not built for war, but Jake and his crew began modifications using Lyra knowledge to upgrade their mining lasers into weapons and their shields into something that could withstand energy blasts that would normally vaporize metal. During the 3-week journey to her home system, Lyra taught them about the Void Hunters, who were beings that existed partially in another dimension and fed on the life energy of physical species by destroying their molecular bonds. She also taught Jake more personal things during quiet moments in the ship corridors, like how her people chose life partners through a ceremony called the bonding, where two minds became permanently linked across any distance. Jake asked if humans could participate in such a ceremony, and Lyra blushed that deep violet again, saying that theoretically yes, but it had never been done, because most species could not handle the complete openness of thought and feeling. The crew trained every day with Lyra teaching them weak points in Void Hunter ships, and Jake discovered that human creativity and unconventional thinking were advantages because humans did things that no logical species would consider. Lisa became close friends with Lyra and one day asked her directly if she had feelings for Jake, which made the alien princess literally glow, with a soft purple light as she admitted that yes. But she was afraid. She was afraid because her father would never approve of a human mate, and her people would see it as weakness, and Jake himself might not want to be connected to an alien mind forever, with no privacy between them. Lisa laughed and told her that Jake had been in love since the moment he carried her onto the ship, and that humans were stubborn enough to fight entire empires for love, which was both their weakness and their greatest strength. When they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Lyra's system, they saw a battle that defied description, with ships made of crystal and light fighting against dark shapes that seemed to eat the very fabric of space itself. The Celestial Empire fleet was losing badly, with half their ships already dark and drifting, and the Void Hunters were closing in on the planet itself, where billions of Lyra people lived in cities that had existed for millennia. Jake did not hesitate as he pushed the Liberty to maximum speed, heading straight for the largest Void Hunter ship while broadcasting on all frequencies that Earth stood with the Celestial Empire against the darkness. The Void Hunters had never encountered humans before, and they made a fatal mistake by dismissing the small mining ship as insignificant until Jake and his crew did something completely insane. By their standards, they deliberately crashed the Liberty into the Void Hunter command ship, while overloading their modified mining laser to create an explosion that temporarily disrupted the dimensional field that kept the Void Hunters anchored in physical space. The Liberty crew escaped in pods at the last second, and the explosion created a chain reaction that destabilized 3 more Void Hunter ships giving the celestial fleet the opening they needed to counterattack Lyra, Father Emperor. Cosmos was a being of pure light and energy, who personally rescued Jake and his crew from their escape pods, and his telepathic voice was like thunder in their minds, as he demanded to know why humans would sacrifice their ship. Jake stood tall despite being in the presence of a being that could destroy him with a thought, and said simply that Lyra had told them about honor and family, and humans understood that some things were worth dying for. The Emperor turned his attention to his daughter, who was glowing with pride and love, and he saw the connection between her and this small, fragile human who had just saved thousands of his people. The battle turned in their favor as more human ships arrived, because Lisa had sent a distress call to Earth before they attacked, and the United Earth Fleet had responded with everything they could spare to help their new allies. Humans brought nuclear weapons and kinetic bombardment and tactics that involved ramming and boarding in close quarters, combat that horrified and amazed the Celestial Empire forces who fought with energy and grace. Together they drove the Void Hunters back into their dimensional rift, but not before the enemy promised that this was not over, and that they would return, in greater numbers to consume both empires. In the aftermath, as debris floated through space like deadly snow, Jake found Lyra on the Imperial flagship, and she ran to him, not caring about protocol or propriety, as she threw her arms around him. Her father watched this display with what might have been amusement if beings of pure energy could be amused, and he spoke directly into Jake, mind saying that any warrior who would die for his daughter had earned the right to court her. The ceremony happened a week later on the crystal planet's surface, where the cities sang with harmonious frequencies, and beings of every color in the spectrum gathered to witness the first human celestial bonding. Jake stood in ceremonial armor that felt weird on his mining roughened body, while Lyra wore robes that shifted through every color of her emotional spectrum, showing her joy and nervousness and deep love. When they touched hands for the bonding ritual, Jake felt his mind open like a flower, and Lyra consciousness flowed into his while his flowed into hers, creating a connection that transcended anything he had imagined. He could feel her every emotion and thought and memory, from her childhood in the Crystal Palace to her fear when the pirates attacked, to her growing love for him that blazed like a sun in her mind. She could feel his loneliness in space and his wonder when he first saw her, and his absolute certainty that he would protect her with his life, and his acceptance of her alien nature without reservation. The bonding complete, they were now linked forever, and Jake could feel Lyra's presence in his mind like a warm, constant companion that would be with him no matter where in the universe they traveled. Life after the bonding ceremony was an adjustment that Jake had not fully anticipated, as he woke up each morning feeling Lyra's emotions mixed with his own like paint colors, swirling together but never quite blending completely. The first challenge came when they returned to Earth as the first official ambassadors of the new alliance, and Jake had to explain to the United Earth Council how he had married an alien princess without permission or protocol. The media went crazy with headlines about the human who had won the heart of alien royalty, and everyone wanted to know if it was true love or a political arrangement, which made Jake laugh because politics was the last thing on his mind. Lyra handled the attention with grace that came from years of royal training, but Jake could feel through their bond how overwhelming she found human cities with their chaos and noise compared to the harmonious crystal cities of her home. They were given an apartment in New York where the United Nations had built a special embassy for Celestial Empire relations, and Lyra spent hours at the window watching humans rush about their daily lives with fascination. She told Jake that humans were unique in the galaxy because they created art and music not for harmony but for expression, and their food was based on flavor rather than nutritional efficiency, which she found delightfully primitive. Jake taught her to cook pasta and pizza, while she taught him to sing the crystal harmonies that could literally reshape matter at the molecular level, though his human vocal cords could only approximate the sounds. Their biggest test came when Lyra discovered she was pregnant, which was supposed to be impossible according to every xenobiologist on both planets, but apparently the bonding had changed them both at a genetic level. The pregnancy was difficult because the baby was developing characteristics of both species, and Lyra needed both human food and energy crystals from her home world to sustain the growing life inside her. Jake never left her side during the 9 months of waiting, and he could feel the baby through their bond, like a third presence that was somehow both human and celestial, and entirely its own being. When their daughter was born, she had purple skin like her mother, but with a more human texture and 2 eyes instead of 4. Though they had the same diamond sparkle as Lyra eyes, they named her Hope, because she represented the future of both species, and the doctors were amazed that she could survive breathing both oxygen and the methane mixture that Lyra people preferred. Hope grew faster than human children, but slower than celestial younglings, and she could speak both English and the crystal language, by age 2 while showing an ability to touch technology and understand it instinctively. The Void Hunters returned when Hope was 3 years old, attacking frontier colonies of both empires with new weapons that could drain the life from entire planets in hours rather than days. Jake was assigned to lead a joint task force of human and celestial forces, which was challenging because the two species had completely different approaches to warfare and cooperation. Humans wanted to attack head-on with overwhelming force, while Celestials preferred to use harmony and precision, and Jake had to find a balance that used the strengths of both without their weaknesses. The breakthrough came when Hope accidentally showed them something while playing with her toys, creating a shield that was both energy and matter, combined in a way that neither species had imagined possible. She had inherited her mother's ability to manipulate energy and her father, human creativity, to think outside established patterns, and the combination created something entirely new that could stop Void Hunter weapons. Jake and Lyra worked with scientists from both species to understand what their daughter had done, and they discovered that human-celestial hybrid technology could create weapons and defenses that neither species could make alone. The war with the Void Hunters escalated as they brought reinforcements from their dimension, but now the Alliance had hope-inspired technology, and more hybrid children were being born to other human-celestial couples. Jake led the fleet into battle, while Lyra coordinated from the command station, and through their bond they could strategize in real time without any communication delay that normally plagued space battles. Decisive battle happened near Jupiter, where the Void Hunters had opened a massive rift to bring their entire invasion fleet through at once, which would have been enough to destroy both civilizations. Jake made the decision to fly his new hybrid ship directly into the rift, while Lyra channeled energy through their bond to create a resonance that would collapse the dimensional doorway from the inside. It was suicide mission, except for one thing: that Hope had shown them that hybrid technology could exist in both dimensions simultaneously, allowing Jake to survive in the void between realities, inside the rift. Jake saw the true form of the Void Hunters, which were beings of pure hunger and entropy that had consumed thousands of civilizations. Before encountering humans and Celestials, he understood in that moment that they feared the Alliance not because of their weapons, but because humans and Celestials together created something they could not consume, which was hope and love and creativity. Using the hybrid technology, Jake set off a chain reaction that not only collapsed the rift, but sent a feedback pulse through dimensional space that would prevent the Void Hunters from opening new rifts for generations. He emerged from the collapsing rift with his ship badly damaged but intact, and Lyra's voice in his mind was crying with relief as she guided him home to their daughter, who was waiting with her grandmother. The Emperor himself came to Earth for the celebration and declared that the hybrid children would be the bridge between species, and that Jake would be given the title of Prince Consort, with all the rights of celestial royalty. But Jake cared less about titles than about the fact that he could hold his wife and daughter, and feel their love through the bond that made them more than family, but something entirely new in the universe. Lisa, who had become admiral of the hybrid fleet, joked that Jake had gone from space miner to alien royalty in less than 5 years, which had to be some kind of record even for humans. The peace that followed was not without challenges, as both species had to adjust to their new reality, where the impossible had become possible, and the future was being written by children who were neither human nor celestial. But both Jake and Lyra built a home on the moon, where the gravity was comfortable for both of them, and Hope could practice her abilities without accidentally reshaping the landscape, which she had done once to Central Park. They often sat together watching Earth rise over the lunar horizon, while Lyra sang the crystal harmonies, and Jake told stories of human history, and Hope played with light and matter like they were toys. 10 years had passed since the final battle with the Void Hunters, and Hope was now 13 years old. With the gangly awkwardness of a human teenager, combined with the ethereal grace of her celestial heritage, she attended a special school on the Moon Colony, where hybrid children learned alongside both human and celestial youngsters, and Jake often worried about the pressure she faced being the first of her kind. Through their bond, Jake could feel Lyra's own concerns as their daughter struggled with identity questions that no one had answers for because she was writing the book on what it meant to be both species. One morning, Hope came to breakfast with her skin flickering between purple and pink, which was new, and she announced that she wanted to visit Earth alone to understand her human heritage better. Jake felt Lyra's emotional spike through their bond, but before either parent could object, Hope demonstrated that she had inherited more than they realized by partially phasing out of reality like a controlled version of what Void Hunters did. She explained that she had been practicing in secret and could now move between dimensions, which terrified both her parents, but also filled them with pride at her growing abilities. The compromise was that Hope could attend human high school in Montana where Jake had grown up, but she would have a guardian and would return to the moon base every weekend. The guardian turned out to be Lisa, daughter Katie, who was fully human, but had grown up around aliens and could help Hope navigate the social complexities of human teenage life. Jake and Lyra watched their daughter board the shuttle, and Jake remembered his own first day at that same school 30 years ago, never imagining his child would walk those halls as living proof of interstellar peace. Hope's first day was rough as some students feared her while others treated her like a celebrity, and she called home crying that night saying she did not belong anywhere in the universe. Jake told her about his own isolation as a space miner, and how he had felt alone until he heard her mother distress signal. And sometimes belonging was not about fitting in, but about finding your purpose. Lyra sang to her through the communication, linked with harmonies that could be felt even across the vast distance, and reminded Hope that she was not meant to be one thing or another, but something entirely new. 3 months into the school year, Hope made her first real friend, a boy named Sam, who was fascinated by science and did not care that she had purple skin and could phase through walls. Sam helped her with Earth history, while she helped him with advanced physics, and their friendship became the talk of the school, especially when Hope accidentally revealed her abilities during a basketball game. She had jumped impossibly high to block a shot, and then floated for several seconds before remembering that humans could not do that, and the video went viral across both Earth and celestial networks. The incident brought unwanted attention, including from an extremist group that believed human-celestial mixing was an abomination, and they tried to kidnap Hope from her school. Hope defended herself by creating an energy shield that protected not just her but her entire class, and then she did something remarkable by not retaliating against her attackers, but containing them safely until authorities arrived. The incident made Jake and Lyra rush to Earth, where they found Hope comforting her human classmates who were traumatized by the attack, and she was more concerned about them than about herself. The school principal wanted Hope to leave for everyone's safety, but her classmates organized a protest saying she belonged there, and Sam gave a speech about how Hope represented the future they wanted to live in. Jake had never been prouder, as he watched his daughter choose to stay, despite the danger, because she said running away would prove the extremists right, and she would not give them that satisfaction. A month later, Hope discovered something that changed everything when she accidentally made contact with a young Void Hunter who had been separated from the collective and was dying in dimensional space. Through her unique biology, she could communicate with it and learned that Void Hunters were not evil, but were driven by an instinctive hunger they could not control, like cosmic parasites. Hope brought this information to the Joint Council and proposed something radical, that they try to find a way to feed the Void Hunters without destroying civilizations, which everyone thought was impossible. But Hope had inherited her father's determination and her mother's intelligence, and she worked with scientists from both species to develop synthetic energy sources that could sustain Void Hunters. The first test was dangerous, as they had to lure a Void Hunter scout into a controlled environment, but Hope insisted on being present because she was the only one who could communicate with them. Jake and Lyra watched from behind protective barriers as their teenage daughter stood before a being of living entropy and offered it an alternative to destruction and conquest. The Void Hunter took the synthetic energy, and for the first time in millions of years, one of their kind was satisfied without destroying life, and it communicated through hope that others would be interested. This began a new chapter in galactic history, as Hope became the first ambassador to the Void Hunters, teaching them to exist without destroying, while they taught her about dimensions beyond physical understanding. Jake sometimes watched his daughter working, and could not believe that the powerful young woman negotiating peace between three species was the same baby he had held 13 years ago. Lyra reminded him through their bond that hope was exactly what the universe needed, which was proof that different species could create something greater than the sum of their parts. When Hope was 15, she fell in love with Sam, who had stayed by her side through everything, and Jake had to resist his protective father instincts when they started dating. Ira found it amusing that Jake was more worried about his daughter dating a human boy than about her negotiating with beings that could destroy planets with a thought. Hope and Sam relationship was sweet and simple and very human, which gave Hope the grounding she needed as she balanced her role as bridge between species with being a teenager. They went to prom together, where Hope wore a dress that shifted colors with her emotions, and Sam wore a traditional tuxedo, and they looked like any other young couple in love except for the purple skin. Jake and Lyra chaperoned the dance, and at one point Jake pulled his daughter aside and said, "Hey, sweetie, you look beautiful." And Hope blushed violet just like her mother, and replied, "Yes, darling." 25 years after Jake first heard that distress signal, the galaxy had become a very different place, with trade routes connecting human celestial and reformed Void Hunter territories in peaceful exchange. Hope was now 28 and had married Sam in a ceremony that combined human traditions with celestial harmonics, while Void Hunters provided dimensional fireworks that existed in multiple realities. Simultaneously, Jake and Lyra had become grandparents when Hope gave birth to twins who were 1/4 celestial and 3/4 human, but somehow inherited abilities from all three species, including dimensional awareness. The boy they named Marcus after Jake's father, and the girl they named Stella after a celestial word meaning eternal light, and both children could phase between dimensions before they could walk. Jake was 55 now, with gray in his hair, but still strong from years of maintaining his health to keep up with his alien wife, who aged much slower than humans. Lyra looked exactly the same as the day they met, except for a deeper wisdom in her 4 eyes, and their bond had grown so strong that they often communicated without words or even conscious thought. They lived primarily on the moon base, which had grown into a city called Unity, where thousands of mixed families made their homes in the low gravity that was comfortable for multiple species. Lisa had retired as admiral and opened a restaurant that served fusion cuisine, combining Earth food with celestial energy supplements, and it became the social hub of Unity. One day, a new crisis emerged when explorers found evidence of an ancient civilization that had created the Void Hunters millions of years ago as weapons in a war that destroyed them. The ruins contained warnings that the Void Hunters were just the first wave, and that something called the Devourers would eventually come to clean up what the Void Hunters missed. Hope led the archaeological team that decoded the warnings, while Jake and Lyra organized the Defense Alliance that now included 12 different species who had joined after seeing the peace with Void Hunters. The ancient texts revealed that the Devourers were beings of pure antimatter that existed in a reverse dimension where time flowed backward and entropy decreased instead of increased. Hope realized that her children might be the key because they could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously and might be able to communicate with beings that existed in reverse time. Marcus and Stella were only 5 years old, but they understood the danger and volunteered to help, which broke Jake's heart, even as he felt proud of their courage. The preparation took years as the Alliance built weapons and shields based on hybrid technology, while Hope trained her children to navigate dimensions that should not exist. Jake spent those years teaching combat tactics to young soldiers of all species, while Lyra coordinated the diplomatic efforts to bring more civilizations into the Alliance. When the Devourers finally arrived, they came not as ships but as tears in reality itself that unmade everything they touched, turning matter into nothing and time into chaos. The battle was not fought with weapons but with will, as Hope and her children entered the reverse dimension, while Jake and Lyra anchored them to normal reality through their family bonds inside the reverse dimension. Hope found that the Devourers were not conquerors, but cleaners programmed to reset the universe whenever life grew too complex or dangerous. She negotiated with them using her children as translators, showing them that life had evolved beyond the parameters their creators had imagined, and that destruction was no longer necessary. The Devourers agreed to return to their dimension after Hope showed them that the universe was now self-regulating with species working together instead of destroying each other. The victory celebration lasted for weeks across all allied worlds, but Jake and Lyra slipped away to their private quarters where they could just be together without the weight of the galaxy. They stood at their window watching Earth rise over the lunar horizon, and Lyra asked if Jake ever regretted answering that distress signal all those years ago. Jake pulled her close and said that finding her had given him purpose and family and adventures beyond his wildest dreams, and he would do it all again without hesitation. Hope visited with her family, and they all sat together as she told her children the story of how their grandparents met when a human miner saved an alien princess. Marcus asked if it was true that Grandpa had said, "Hey, sweetie," when he first tried to flirt with Grandma, and everyone laughed as Lyra blushed that familiar violet. Stella wanted to know if she would find love across the stars like her grandparents and parents had. And Jake told her that love found you when you least expected it. Sam had become a renowned scientist, studying dimensional physics, and he still looked at Hope like she was the most amazing thing in the universe, which she probably was. The years passed peacefully as the alliance grew stronger, and more species joined after hearing how humans had turned enemies into friends through determination and hope. Jake lived to be 95, which was extended by celestial medical technology and Lyra energy sharing through their bond that kept him younger than his years. On his last day, Jake was surrounded by his family, including great-grandchildren who were even more remarkably hybrid than their parents, with abilities that defied classification. He told them all that humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons or technology, but their ability to love without limits and to fight for others without reservation. Lyra held him as he passed, and through their bond she felt no fear or sadness from him, just contentment and love and gratitude for the life they had shared. She lived another 200 years carrying his memory in her mind, where their bond kept a piece of him alive. And she told their story to generations of children. Hope became the first galactic president elected by all member species, and she led with the wisdom. Her parents had taught her that different was not dangerous but beautiful. The galaxy eventually forgot that humans and celestials had once been separate species, as intermarriage became so common that everyone had some mix of both in their heritage. But they never forgot the story of Jake and Lyra, and how a simple greeting between strangers had changed the course of history and created a future of infinite possibilities. The end.